Good morning and welcome to Global Minded. We are doing a series of different sessions to support people during COVID-19. And we're delighted today to have Erika Twani from the Learning One-to-One Foundation and a number of other interested folks that came on early. We got to spend some time meeting each of them and finding out where they're from around the country. We are delighted that we have a sponsor today. It's Pink Lion AI. They do artificial intelligence, and they're one of our partners to help us achieve our bold goal. And for those of you who aren't as familiar, Global Minded is about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get students who don't have the resources to connect them to role models, mentors, internships, jobs. And we do that in a number of different ways. But one of the goals we have is to algorithmically connect 25 million first-gen students, first-gen grads, those who work with them, and those who want to hire them to role models, mentors, internships, and jobs. And our goal was to do that by 2025. And now with COVID, we realize we need to be delivering that solution in the next year and a half or 2 years. It's really urgent. So thank you for joining us today. And it is my pleasure to introduce our Director of Content and Events, and that is Lisa Wyckoff, and she's gonna get us started.
Hi everybody, thanks for joining us today. I wanted to just say that Global Mind is very proud to present Closing the Equity Gap with Dr. Erika Twani. Your microphones, if you will please mute your microphones. And then if you have a question, there's a chat button at the bottom of your screen. And you can ask questions. Erika will answer those at the end of the presentation. I'd like to introduce Erika. She's a first-gen graduate and founder and CEO of Learning One-to-One. Her philosophy is to simplify complex concepts, making them useful for everyone, starting with children. She's advised government officials and education leaders around the world through the use of technology in education. So now I'd like to hand it over to Erika.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen now. And the idea is for the session today is I'll give you a practical 6-step framework that you can use with students, you can use with your children, you can use with, you can advise teachers, and to make sure that students are learning through this time at home. So let's get started with, just a minute. Let me see, I'm an engineer, but sometimes it's just a second. Can you see the presentation?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's get started. So as Lisa mentioned, my name is Erika. I'm the CEO of Learning One-to-One, and today I'll be sharing with you some of our research and development in pedagogy and how students can improve in their learning, not only when they are at home, but also at any time to become lifelong learners. So besides all the challenges that we're already having our plate with 5 million jobs, you most likely have heard about it, 5 million jobs they'll be lost to artificial intelligence, 65% of children starting kindergarten, we grow with professions that do not yet exist. I believe there's somebody with the mic on. So Lisa, if you can help me with that, please. And besides that, all the challenges we have with children bombarded with so much technology, the question is does ADD really exist because, you know, of all this technology getting our attention? So, but at the same time, while educators, many educators are struggling today because of the situation, students at home, thousands of others are doing really well. And let's get to the point of analyzing what's going on with those educators. There's a recent report from the Brookings Institute, based out of DC, most likely you know them, about school closures around the world, government responses, and learning inequality around the world. And it's very interesting to see that 1.5 billion students are out of school today. And that 91%, that represents 91% of the students enrolled in the world. And luckily, 90% of the students of high-income countries have some online access to some online content, which includes the United States. However, it's not necessarily the reality of many areas, like we were talking earlier with Timothy. Many rural areas, students do not have access to the internet. And that goes to this statistic, only 36% of low-income families have access to internet. So there's a huge inequality in terms of quality of education delivered today to students. And there's a clear lack of preparation of our school system and our education system to make sure that every single student have access to a high quality education. So this is in addition to all the challenges that teachers already had. And so we have some of the participants today here that are teachers and some that have access to teachers, have interaction with teachers that are very familiar with those challenges. And besides that, now we have to deal with children at home, students at home, and how do we make sure that they're getting high quality education? So the question is, how does all of this, do you know that if this will work for you and what you're doing is really the right thing to do? So I want to introduce you to the results of our research. We found three main things. The very first thing is that to have effective learning, we must understand that students are unique and they need to have they learn differently. That's the reality. They need to have something that is adequate to them. So personalized experience, personalized learning, it is the way to go. So, but we also found out that instead of having the teachers responsible for this personalization, the only way for us to make sure that the students will have a lifelong learning is when they learn to personalize their learning by themselves. So that's a skill. They need to personalize. They need to understand how to personalize their own learning. Number two, we also found out that cognitive and social emotional skills are equally important. Today, our schools are focused on cognitive skills. They're not necessarily focused on social emotional skills. Perhaps you have some lucky kids will have access to a after-school program, social emotional development, etc. However, what our research found is that you must develop both of them at the same time and at the same level. That's very interesting because it brings a new perspective for schools around the world. And number three is that students must have a choice. They must have a say in their learning. That's the only way for them to succeed in this crazy, ever-changing world and unpredictable as we can see right now. We can never predict what's going to happen the rest of this year, let alone for the next 10 years. So the only way for us to guarantee the success of our students is making sure that they have a voice and they learn to do things themselves. So we went to this premise. So you can observe here, there's nothing like special technology or special curriculum or special after-school program involved in these findings. And you can go to many other research around the world, and you're going to see that they will find similar things. It does not depend on an external resource. It depends on the student themselves. So the other premise that we must consider is this. Any type of education, we must make sure that it can work in any situation, meaning it's an urban or rural school, with or without technology, with this or that curriculum, if it is a homeschool or if it is a at-school program, it does not matter. So how do we make sure that we have this continuum? Imagine if all the education systems worked with this premise before, we wouldn't be having this problem right now, right? Children will go home and they'll continue to learn. So how do we make sure that this happens? So the other aspect that we must consider is to make sure that we include and take into consideration all the research and development that has been in education for the last decades. This is very important, and that has taken us to a different level. Personalized learning you see everywhere, competency-based learning, project-based learning, autonomous learning, social-emotional learning. So we must make sure that we consider all of those points in anything that we do to make sure that children are being successful academically. Now, here's the result then after all these studies and all these considerations. We came up with relational learning. Relational learning has been in more than many decades of research and development. Perhaps you haven't heard that yet, but it's based on the co-construction of knowledge and practices that enhance students' potential, because it starts with something that every student already has. So what we did is we took all of those things and we simplified in 6 steps to make sure that it is easy to understand. As Lisa said in the beginning, one of my passions is to make sure that we make things easy for people to understand and to consume and to work with. And that's exactly what we did with relational learning. So we've been working with schools all over the world, and this is what's happening in those schools. We see an average of 40% increase in reading and comprehension improvement in the very first year. We see dropout rates going to 0. And we see curriculum coverage going to 100%. And there are many other metrics that are not here, but those metrics I know are relevant, especially for the public school system. So that's why we wanted to show you this. But there are some others very interesting. For instance, 37% of students can finish 1 grade level in 7 months. It's absolutely amazing how efficient it can be when we start from something that students already have. So here is what it is. It's a brain. So if you go to rural anywhere, China, and if you go to urban schools, and if you go to the middle of the country and the West Coast and the East Coast, if you go north and south, every single student will have that. That's different from a lab or a computer or internet access. We cannot guarantee that. However, we can guarantee that every student has a brain. So how do we make sure that we can work with what students already have? So I'll give you 2 points for you to consider before we start going through the 6 steps. The 6 steps will be interesting for you because it's applicable with your students and with your children right now. Very simple. So the first thing that I wanted to share with you before we get to that is that how the brain works. The brain has 100 billion neurons. Most likely, most of you already know that. And those, when we learn something, what happens in our brain is we form neural networks. So neurons get together, right? And they get together through something that glue them, called neurotransmitters. So the right amount of neurotransmitters will make sure that those neural connections or the neural networks are strongly bonded. That's very important because otherwise you're going to forget what you have learned. So the secret sauce here is to make sure that we have the right neurotransmitters exciting the neurons when you're learning, because that learning will stay with you forever, right? So that's what Dr. Donald Hebb discovered. And that's the famous say that most likely some of you already know, cells that fire together, wire together. So I'll give you an example so you understand what I mean. Let's say that I want to explain to you what artificial intelligence is. So artificial intelligence is a gatherer of data that is processed by algorithms that are a finite number of steps, and that will give you a specific result. It is like baking a cake. The data is your ingredients, the algorithm is your recipe, and the result is your cake. So the right ingredients with the right recipe, which has a finite number of steps, will give you a cake, right? So what we are doing right now is we're connecting artificial intelligence that many of us do not know what it means with something you already know, with the existing neural connection in your brain. So that's why from now on, you always remember what artificial intelligence is all about. It's about baking a cake, right? So this is an example of connecting an existing neural connection to what you're learning right now. Now, this is why this is so important. We have 70,000 plus thoughts per day. 95% of those thoughts are about the past, are about things that you already lived, which means the same choices, the same behaviors, and the same emotions in a vicious cycle all the time. So the only way for us to change this is to make sure that we're learning something new, that will give us a new perspective and will transform our choices, behaviors, and emotions. So that's why we must continue to learn at all times. And that is why whenever you have students that are suspended, you will never be able to change their behaviors, because now you understand that the choices, behaviors, and emotions only change when you learn something new. So instead, what we have to do is make sure that we personalize their learning experience, that we excite their neurons, and that we're making the connections that are right for them, to give them new perspective, and therefore transform their choices, behaviors, and emotions, right? So no more suspensions for students anymore. Now, the second thing that I wanted you to have in mind is this. Most likely you have heard about the 10,000 hour rule, right? That, The 10,000 hour rule is about practicing something for 10,000 hours and you're going to be an expert on it. Now, here's the thing. Here's the amount of hours that students spend in school, sitting and waiting for someone to tell them what to do. 16,800 hours. So when they are 18 years old, they leave school, they're experts on this. They can do this over and over and over again for the rest of their lives. And that's the behavior that we're practicing with students every single day in school. So we, of course, want them to be creative, and we want them to be proactive, and we want them to follow their dreams and to succeed in life. But at the end of the day, we're not providing that in the normal school, in the average school, because that's exactly what they're practicing, right? So now, let's review then the 6 steps of the relational learning framework that you can use today with your students or with your children at home. The very first step, it's called planning, goal setting and planning. So students here will learn to be very specific, to pick achievable goals and measurable metrics, and be very precise on what they're picking to work with. And with the practice over and over and over and over again, on the right side, you can see all the skills they're developing. So imagine practicing goal setting, planning, work effectiveness, decision-making, prioritization, responsibility, accountability for 16,800 hours. When we have children leaving school at the age of 18, they will have that as part of their lives, right? So that's why it's so important to make sure that students are doing that. And here's an example that we can we can all relate. Imagine you want to be a runner, and you say, simply saying, I want to be a runner, it's not going to happen. But if you say something like, I'm going to walk for 30 minutes every day, and then I'm going to start doing intervals of run and walk, and then I'm going to increase my running. And at the end, once I'm running for 30 minutes, I'm going to set new goals. That will make you a runner. Not just saying I want to become a runner. Because goal setting and planning forces us to state an intention, right? And from the intention, we execute it and we make it happen. And that's how we become a runner. Children will have the same experience over and over and over again until they're experts on this. So the process is the same with younger children. Now, I get a lot of this question all the time. So how do you do with kindergarten children? It's the same thing, but instead of writing, they're drawing their goals. So whenever you have little kids, give them choices, 1 or 2 choices, they pick from one and they draw whatever their planning is. And you see little by little, they start planning their day, and all of a sudden they start planning their week, and they start planning their month. And now we see children at the age of 12, 13 years old planning for their lives. They already know what they want for life. They already know how to reach it. They already know where to go and what to do to get to their dreams. So dreaming is no longer a problem, is no longer something that, it's, I'll be lucky if I get it in my life, but dreaming is something that is feasible because now children know how to plan. So in order for you to work with children to plan, just do this. Just show them what the activities for the day is, and then let them decide how to tackle those activities. Let them decide what time they're going to do what. And little by little, they'll grow in that planning skill, and they'll start planning themselves, their day, their week, their month, and their lives. So be patient, start with that, and make sure that little by little, you let them do it. And then we're going to go to step 2. After you plan, what are you going to do in the day? And now we're going to explore. So remember what we said about Dr. Donald Hebb and about how we connect existing, your knowledge of baking a cake with artificial intelligence. This is exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to understand what students already know about a topic, and then we're going to connect that to the new knowledge, right? So here we are just exploring what students already know. We're going to ask questions, we're going to have activities, and we're going to make sure that students are remembering what they already know. It does not necessarily need to be related to the topic. Like, for instance, you just learned about artificial intelligence without knowing anything about technology, but you know how to bake a cake. So we can connect those things, even though they're not related. So explore is all about previous knowledge. And on the right, you see all the soft skills that we are developing just by practicing explore over and over and over again. Then here's Dr. Donald Hebb, what he said: cells that fire together, wire together, right? Now, the step number 3 is called research. So in this step, what we're going to do is make sure that students have access to all sorts of resources. Remember, one of our premises is to make sure that we can use any curriculum, any resources available. So if children have computers, if children have books, if they have magazines, and even if they don't have anything, because you worked with schools in the middle of nowhere, they have no access to anything at all, they find a way once the brain is committed to learn something. So here, what we're going to do is make sure that we use all the resources available and find the information and start researching, and then summarize that information in something that is useful for children to review later, such as a concept map, an organizational grid, so on and so forth. This step is very important to improve reading and comprehension with kids. And that is why, because of this one, this specific step, we're getting those results of 40% increase in reading comprehension per year. Now, the challenge is when teachers have all the answers, right? And students do not have the opportunity to research. Then students will be conditioned to always expect someone else to know things, and they'll want answers immediately. And that's a huge problem because now they're dependent, and they'll practice that over and over and over again for 16,800 hours. And they'll become experts on what? Waiting for someone else to have an answer. And that is why, a lot of people, most likely, a lot of people like that. We have people that is completely dependent on somebody else to do anything in their lives. They have no idea. On the other hand, once we have children with this practice of research, they will be able to ask questions, they'll be able to think critically, they'll be able to improve their reading comprehension, have discernment of what's good, what's not good, and find resources. So that's why research is so important. Now, in order to do that, all you have to do is to provide resources to start with for students, for your students, right? Anything that is available, anything. And then provide students with a methodology to translate what they have read, what they have learned into their own understanding. The way that we know that children already learned something, and even us, is when we can repeat it. And we can repeat it in such a way that makes sense to us, right? So the fourth step is practice. Now, here's the thing. Here's where traditional education jumps right in, right? After you have a lecture, then you do some exercises and then you have some homework and you expect children to learn that. But hey, we didn't have that, all those previous 3 steps, which is the key and the clue for neurotransmitters to get excited, for the neural networks to get formed, and for learning to stay in their brains. We just jump into practice, and that's not going to happen because the neural networks will be way too weak. They're not going to learn. So that's why the first 3 steps are so important to make sure that we get into practice. Then we go to relate. Here is where students realize the real purpose of what they have learned. So what they're doing here is they're relating what they have learned to their own lives. So you can repeat thousands of times how important is calculus for your life and how important is geography for your life. But at the end of the day, if the students don't get to that themselves, nothing's going to stick. Nothing's going to stay forever. And that's what we want. So in order to do this, what you got to do is make sure that students are asking that. How will I use that, what I learned? Because that's the way that the brain will connect to the student's soul, to who they are, to their practices, to their lives. And that is how learning will stay forever in their brains. So this is the relate part. Now, finally, we go to something called metacognition. Metacognition is can be translated in self-evaluation. So today, if you ask any student to self-evaluate themselves, they just say, oh, I'm not good at this, but I'm good at that, and I'm not good at this, and I'm not. It doesn't make sense. It's not going to help them to improve. They're just aware of something that somebody else told them. But the real thing is that with this self-evaluation, we're evaluating the process, not necessarily the result or the product. We're evaluating the process. So in order for you to do that, here's a simple tip. For the metacognition, make sure you ask questions after students have gone from steps 1 through 5. How do you feel? How long did it take to finish this unit? Were your goals clear? Have you used more and less of the allotted time? And then students will identify themselves what's going on with the process, not necessarily the result of the content, right? And then they will improve that little by little. In the beginning, most likely they'll say, I don't know what's going to happen, I don't know. And you tell me, because they want to avoid criticism and they want to avoid making mistakes. They want to do something that is completely right from the start. But that's not how we learn. We grow in our learning, right? So then make sure that you allow students to review, to present activities to you, and you review those activities step by step. So from step 1, you review how students are planning. From step 2, you review how they explore, and so on and so forth. And that will reinforce the capability that students most likely do not believe that they have. Then allow them to practice the process over and over and over again. We cannot expect perfection because students are learning something. They're learning a process. It's like learning a language, right? A new language. It's very, very difficult in the beginning, but with time and in practice, it makes it easy until, you know, your head doesn't hurt anymore. So we got to be very, very patient to make sure that students have the opportunity to practice these steps. And finally, praise the process, the progress in the process. So as students learn how to plan and how to explore and how to research and how to do each of the steps, praise that progress. Because if you say, oh, you're so intelligent, you're so smart, that's a killer. If you read the books like Carol Dweck books, Growth Mindset, that's a killer for growth mindset. So you have to make sure that you're praising the progress in the process, right? And with this process of metacognition, what you're doing pretty much is you're reinforcing the I can do attitude of students, the growth mindset. And the more evidence students have that they can do something, the more they'll believe in it. Nobody will hold them. They'll be able to go home, and with the resources they have, they'll continue to learn nonstop. What you're really doing is you're creating and helping students to grow intrinsic motivation, which is the missing part today of the schools that the school system has, and that teachers are struggling to make sure something happens. I go around my neighborhood here and I see kids playing on the streets. They don't want to be inside the house learning. It's not interesting to them. So the only way for us to make sure that this happens is to make sure that students have intrinsic motivation developed. No person, no external exam, no technology will ever help students develop intrinsic motivation but themselves. So here's how here are the 6 steps. And as you could see throughout the presentation is how the 6 steps take into account personalized learning, project-based learning, autonomous learning, competency-based learning, because we are developing cognitive skills and social emotional skills at the same time in the same learning process. And that's how powerful it is to follow those 6 steps. So simple and yet so powerful. So we go deep down and deep dive in this in my upcoming book, Becoming Einstein's Teacher, should be launched in this summer. If you want to register in this link that we provide here, you'll be able to receive updates, and I'll be sharing the chapter 1 of the book pretty soon as it's out of the editing phase with the people that are registered. And with that, I would like to invite Lisa back, and we can answer some questions.
Hi, Erika.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, anyone have any questions? I don't see any in the chat. So does anyone have any questions for Erika?
Hi, this is Anita. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yes.
Sure. And Anita, could you just let us know where you're from and just give us we have context.
Oh, sure. I am from South Florida, where it's about 80 degrees and very muggy right now.
And I'm here too, Anita. Maybe we're in the same neighborhood.
Okay, maybe. So I have a couple of master's degrees. One is in counseling and psychology, and I currently teach as an adjunct for a few schools. 2 of them are career colleges. And one thing that I see missing, especially now with what's going on in the environment, is, and I get a lot, most of my students are adults. They're first time higher learning participants. Many will go on to be, of course, first generation graduates. And what I am hearing from them is not only are they overwhelmed with how to teach their children at home, what tools to give them, but more importantly, and where my background comes in, is the children who have differing abilities, who are used to a routine in a classroom with all the therapies that they need intertwined into the learning process. That's not happening. That is not happening at home. And these children are, from what I know, from what I'm observing and hearing elsewhere, is they are, for lack of a better word, they're really falling behind fast. It's like they're losing all the skills they've learned for the past several months. So how are these children going to be served? How can we implement and plan for the children with differing abilities, whether they be chronic medical conditions or physical or emotional, mental, whatever? How can we better serve these children with the environment that we have today?
So you're talking about special education?
I'm talking, special education for the most part.
With a specific routine?
With exceptional student education. From students everywhere from preschool to in college.
Right.
And now, especially, I would say the questions that I'm fielding more than any other are coming from parents who have from preschoolers up to middle school. And they're saying, I don't know what to do. My child has autism, and,
yes,
or my child, and I can relate because I have a daughter who, has a plethora of differing abilities. And
so Anita, this is Carol.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I just said, this is Carol, and we just let Erika answer, and then let's make sure we get others' questions as well, so we can, make sure we round that out. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Anita, answering your question, it's very simple. The 6-step learning process works with children regardless of their cognitive abilities or physical abilities, etc. We have worked with students with like half of the brain, or blind students, or students in the wheelchair, or all sorts of, with students with autism. It doesn't matter. As long as we understand that those students, we have a certain level of excellence. So we cannot expect those students to have a same development of the student next door. I wouldn't say comparing those students all together, but in our system today, what we do is that student has a problem because that student does not learn how the other students learn. It's not like that. We first have to make sure that we respect the development of each child and to respect the rhythm and the pace of learning of each child. Of course, those children will learn a little slower, but it doesn't matter. They're